This little girl vanished while playing outside one evening. 6 months later, her dad looks under their neighbor's dog kennel and found his missing daughter's favorite gown buried there. This discovery would uncover the whole mystery. The Addams family lived in a small home, painted cream with green window frames. Simple, old, but full of warmth. There was a row of mango trees that bordered the Addams family's compound. That evening, inside, Mr. and Mrs. Addams were in high spirits. It was Saturday, and for once, there were no worries weighing them down. The week had ended beautifully. Their only child, 7-year-old Nora, had just returned home from school with a report card. All A's. The little girl had worked so hard, staying up late with her mother to read, humming softly as she practiced spelling words far above her age. Her teachers often said she was a wonder, bright, curious, and full of imagination. Her father had promised her a reward, a visit to the amusement park the next day, but that evening, the family simply wanted to celebrate being together. Mrs. Addams had cooked her husband's favorite meal, jollof rice with grilled chicken, and the smell of it still lingered faintly in the air. A small radio played an old love song, its rhythm filling the living room. The couple danced clumsily to it, laughing every few seconds at each other's missteps. They hadn't danced like that in years. From the corner of the room, Nora sat cross-legged on the rug, sketching butterflies in a small notebook with a blue crayon. Her floral gown shimmered whenever the ceiling fan spun its lazy circles overhead. Her face was bright and full of life, her braids tied with colorful ribbons that bobbed whenever she moved. She looked up every now and then to giggle at her parents, who were now pretending to waltz like professional dancers. "Mama, you're stepping on Daddy's toes," she laughed. Mrs. Addams playfully threw a pillow at her daughter. "I'm not. Your father's feet are just too big." The family erupted in laughter. It was the kind of evening that felt ordinary but perfect, the kind that, without warning, would later replay endlessly in their minds as the last moment of peace before everything changed. As the clock ticked toward 7, the sky darkened to a dusty orange, then slowly to blue. A light breeze stirred the curtains. Nora put down her sketchpad and said softly, "Mommy, can I go outside and play for a little while?" "Just for a bit." Her mother frowned. "It's already getting dark, Nora. You know you're not supposed to play outside at this hour." "But Mama," Nora pleaded, clutching her skipping rope, "school's over. I've been good, right? You said if I did well, I could have more playtime." Mr. Addams smiled and ruffled her hair. "Let her go, darling. It's her first evening of holiday. Let her feel free a bit. Just don't go near the gate, Nora. Stay where we can see you." Mrs. Addams hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. Just for 10 minutes. Nora's face lit up. She kissed both her parents on the cheeks before skipping toward the door, her rope swinging loosely in her hand. The door creaked as it opened. The night air slipped inside, cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth. As Nora stepped outside, she felt a small thrill, the kind that comes with being trusted. The yard looked different under the fading light. Shadows of the mango tree stretched long and thin across the ground, and a faint trail of fireflies blinked near the fence. Across the compound, behind a wire fence, came the sound of the neighbor's dog barking loudly. It had been barking all afternoon, restless and agitated. Nora looked toward it and giggled. "You bark too much," she said softly, as if the dog could understand her. Then she began to skip, the rope slapping rhythmically against the ground. Inside the house, Mr. Addams turned the radio volume up a little. "That's our song," he said, grabbing his wife's hand again. She laughed, and they danced around the couch, their laughter drowning out the sound of the barking dog. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Nora's skipping rope had gone quiet outside, but her parents didn't notice. They were lost in the music and each other's company, wrapped up in the kind of affection that only happens when you forget, for a short while, that the world can be cruel. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing fallen leaves across the yard. The dog barked again, sharper this time, almost like a warning, but the sound was swallowed by the music pouring through the open window. When the song finally ended, Mrs. Adams leaned against her husband's chest, laughing breathlessly. "You're still terrible at dancing," she teased. "And you still love it," he replied, kissing her forehead. She smiled and turned toward the window. "We should call Nora in before mosquitoes eat her alive." Mr. Adams chuckled. "Right. Nora," he called toward the door. "Time's up, little one." No answer. Mrs. Adams smiled faintly. "She's probably pretending not to hear. You know how she hates when playtime ends." Mr. Adams walked to the door. "Nora, come on now," he called again, this time stepping out onto the porch. The yard was dark. Only the faint porch light cast a circle of gold onto the front steps. Beyond that, shadow. The skipping rope lay in the middle of the yard, coiled like a forgotten snake. "Nora," he called again, louder. No response. Mrs. Adams came out behind him, wiping her hands on her dress. "What's wrong?" "I don't see her," he said quietly. Her eyes darted around the compound. The gate was closed. The garden still. Only the rustle of leaves answered them. The dog next door barked again, more aggressively now, its chain rattling as it pulled against the kennel. The noise cut sharply through the silence, making Mrs. Adams jump. "Nora!" she shouted, her voice trembling now. She hurried down the steps, scanning every corner. "Nora, come out! It's not funny anymore." Mr. Adams grabbed a flashlight from inside and swept it across the yard, the flower beds, the back corner, behind the water drum. Nothing. He ran toward the gate, opened it, looked outside. The street was empty, the evening still. "No, no, no," he muttered under his breath. Mrs. Adams was breathing fast, her eyes wide. "She was just here. I heard her skipping." "When?" "A few minutes ago." But neither of them could remember hearing anything over the music. The realization hit them both like a punch to the chest. They had been laughing too loudly, dancing too freely. The flashlight beam trembled in Mr. Adams's hand as he turned toward the dog kennel next door. The animal barked violently, eyes glowing in the beam of light. It pawed at the ground, frantic, as if trying to dig something up. For a brief moment, Mr. Adams felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. Something about that barking, about the dog's wild eyes, felt off. But his mind was too clouded by panic to understand it. "Call the police," he said, his voice cracking. Mrs. Adams stood frozen, whispering her daughter's name like a prayer. The night that had begun with laughter now echoed only with fear, a kind of fear that steals your breath and replaces it with silence. The rope lay still under the moonlight. The dog barked once more, then stopped. And in that awful quiet, both parents realized that the world they knew had just changed forever. The night split open with panic, the kind that starts as disbelief and swells quickly into something uncontainable, the kind that makes your heartbeat feel louder than your own thoughts. Mrs. Adams stumbled barefoot across the front yard, shouting her daughter's name. "Nora! Nora, please answer me." Her voice broke with each cry. She pushed aside flower pots, peered behind the water drum, under the veranda, anywhere a little girl might hide. But the yard that had always been her daughter's small kingdom now felt like a stranger's ground. The air was cold and heavy, filled only with the echo of her cries and the sharp rhythmic bark of the neighbor's dog. The sound grated against her nerves, but she couldn't afford to think about it. She rushed toward the back of the house, flashlight trembling in her hand. Mr. Adams was already there, searching behind the generator shed. "She's not here," he shouted, his voice shaking. "The gate's locked from inside. There's no way she left." Mrs. Adams dropped to her knees beside the small vegetable garden where Nora often played with her dolls, planting tiny flowers made of weeds. She ran her fingers through the soil, as if hoping her child might somehow be hidden beneath it. "She was just here," she whispered, eyes wide. "She was just here." The dog barked again, a violent, almost furious sound. It threw itself at the fence of its kennel next door, snarling. The chain rattled sharply, echoing in the tense night. Mr. Adams flashed his light toward it and shouted, "Quiet!" But the animal only barked louder, its eyes glinting with something wild. Mrs. Adams clutched her head. "Something's wrong, Richard. I can feel it." He took her by the shoulders, trying to stay composed, but his own voice betrayed him. "We'll find her. She's probably hiding. You know how she likes to scare us." "She's never done this before," his wife sobbed. "Never." They searched again, the bushes, behind the clothesline, even under the car parked near the gate. Nothing. The skipping rope still lay in the middle of the yard, slightly tangled, as if dropped mid-play. The sight of it made Mrs. Adams' knees give out. He rushed to her side, lifting her gently. "We're calling the police," he said firmly, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound strong. Within minutes, the neighborhood was awake. Lights flickered on in nearby houses. Doors creaked open. Curious faces peeked through windows. The once quiet evening now buzzed with murmurs of confusion and concern. "What happened?" a neighbor called from over the fence. "It's Nora," Mr. Adams said breathlessly. "She's missing." The words felt strange on his tongue, as if saying them made the nightmare real. Neighbors began to step out, some with flashlights, others still in nightclothes. They joined the frantic search, scanning the corners of the compound, calling the girl's name into the dark. But the night gave no answers. The police arrived less than half an hour later, 2 officers in a dusty patrol van, their flashlights cutting sharp lines through the dark. Their presence brought a flicker of hope, but also an unspoken fear. Because if the police had to be involved, it meant something truly terrible might have happened. Officer Daniels, a tall man with tired eyes, stepped out first. "You're the parents?" "Yes," Mr. Adams said quickly. "Please, she was right here, playing outside. Then she was just gone. Gone. No sound, no scream, nothing," Mrs. Adams said, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her cheeks. The officer's expression hardened. "Show us where she was playing." They led the officers to the middle of the yard. The small skipping rope still glowed faintly under the flashlight. Nearby, one of Nora's sandals lay half buried in the dirt. Officer Daniels crouched down, inspecting the ground. "Any strangers in the area today?" Mr. Adams shook his head. "No, it was just us. The gate's been locked all day." The other officer, a younger man, checked the gate and fence. "No sign of a break-in," he murmured. "And no footprints besides yours." "What about that dog?" Mrs. Adams asked, pointing toward the kennel next door. "It's been barking since evening." The officers turned their flashlights toward the kennel. The dog, a large, brown mixed breed, growled, eyes glowing eerily in the beam of light. It scratched at the ground beneath its cage, whining now instead of barking. "That's Mr. Benson's dog," said a neighbor who had come to watch. "He moved out a few weeks ago. The property's been empty since." Mrs. Adams frowned. "Then why is the dog still there?" "Caretaker comes by sometimes to feed it," another voice said from behind. "No one's seen him today, though." The officers exchanged glances, then returned their attention to the parents. "We'll need to search inside your house, too," Officer Daniels said. Mr. Adams nodded numbly. "Anything you need. Just, please find my daughter." The officers moved methodically, checking each room. Nora's bedroom door was open, her bed neatly made. On the bedside table sat a half-finished drawing of a butterfly. A blue crayon had rolled onto the floor. Everything in the room screamed innocence and absence. When the officers finished their initial sweep, they returned outside. "No signs of forced entry," Daniel said, jotting notes in his pad. "No broken locks, no disturbed windows." You're sure she didn't leave the compound? She wouldn't, Mrs. Adams said firmly. We've warned her about strangers. She's shy. She doesn't talk to anyone she doesn't know. The younger officer paced slowly near the fence, scanning the ground again. Nothing here either. No scuff marks. No drag signs. It didn't make sense. It was as if Nora had simply vanished into thin air. The officers began questioning the neighbors. One by one, they stepped forward. The woman next door who said she was cooking dinner at the time, the young couple across the street who said they were out visiting family, the old man who lived 2 houses away and swore he heard nothing but the barking dog. That same dog barked again, as if protesting the silence of everyone else. Mrs. Adams sat on the porch steps, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her husband knelt beside her, holding her cold hands. The flashlight beam from the police officers moved across their faces, painting them in harsh light and shadow, a couple hollowed out by fear. I should have gone outside sooner, Mrs. Adams whispered. If I had just looked out the window when the dog barked. Mr. Adams closed his eyes, jaw tightening. Don't do that. But it's true, she cried. We were dancing, Richard, laughing while our daughter, our baby, was out there. He pulled her close, his own eyes glistening. We'll find her. I promise we'll find her. But even as he said it, his voice trembled, because deep down, an ache had begun to bloom, that unbearable feeling of guilt that comes when you realize that happiness can be blinding. By midnight, the compound was swarming with more officers. They combed through every corner, searching for any trace, a torn cloth, a footprint, a clue. But the ground beneath the dog kennel remained untouched. No one thought to look there yet. When dawn finally began to break, the orange light of morning fell across the Adams porch. Mr. and Mrs. Adams sat together in silence, holding hands. Their eyes were hollow, red from crying. The police had no leads. Officer Daniels closed his notebook and spoke softly. We'll continue tomorrow. For now, get some rest. Rest. The words sounded cruel. As the officers drove away, the dog next door barked again, the same angry, relentless bark that had started before Nora vanished. Mrs. Adams flinched at the sound, clutching her husband's arm. That dog knows something, she whispered. I can feel it. Mr. Adams said nothing. He just stared across the fence, at the empty house next door, and the kennel that stood beneath the shadow of the mango tree. For the first time, he noticed how disturbed the ground looked beneath it, uneven, slightly raised. But he was too broken to think much of it. Not yet. In that heavy silence of early morning, one truth hung unspoken between them. They hadn't just lost their daughter that night. They had lost the version of themselves that believed the world was safe. The days that followed Nora's disappearance stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months, each one darker and heavier than the last. The Adams home, once filled with laughter and the scent of Mrs. Adams' baking, became a hollow echo of grief. The front yard where Nora had once chased butterflies now lay untouched, her toys scattered like relics of a happier time. By the third week, the case had caught the attention of the local media. Television crews began showing up, their bright lights cutting across the quiet street as reporters spoke into microphones with practiced empathy. 7-year-old Nora Adams vanished from her family compound without a trace, one report began. And so far, investigators have found no leads. People stopped by to console the Adams family, but their eyes always carried curiosity, the kind that hides behind sympathy. It wasn't long before whispers began circulating. Some neighbors swore they heard fighting before the disappearance. Others insisted they'd seen strange men around the house. Maybe they sold her, someone muttered at the market one day. People do anything these days. Sold her? Another replied, lowering her voice. You mean her own parents? You never know. They were dancing that night, weren't they? Maybe they didn't even care she was gone. The rumors spread like oil on water. Fast, messy, impossible to contain. The police had exhausted their initial leads. No ransom calls, no witnesses, no traces. The dog next door continued to bark at odd hours, and that alone kept the neighbors talking. The old house beside the Adams was now empty. Its owner, Mr. Bryan, had moved away shortly after the disappearance. But he had left his dog behind, claiming someone came to feed it every few days. The detail felt strange. Who leaves behind their dog after moving away? The police began to look into him. Mr. Bryan had been an odd man, quiet, reserved, and often kept to himself. He lived alone, and though he exchanged greetings with the Adams family, he never joined in neighborhood activities. His eyes were often tired, and he walked with a limp from an old accident. Children were afraid of him, not because he was mean, but because his silence carried a weight that made them uncomfortable. Yet, it was that very silence that made him the perfect target for suspicion. "Who else could it be?" whispered a woman at church. "The dog was barking that night, wasn't it? Maybe it saw something." "And didn't you hear?" another voice chimed in. "He used to lock that dog up all day." Maybe he was hiding something under there. When the police visited Mr. Bryan's new residence in town, they found him in a modest apartment, startled by their arrival. He stammered as he spoke. "I didn't do anything wrong. I moved because that place carried bad memories. Everyone looked at me like I was the devil." The officer searched his new place thoroughly. Kitchen, bedroom, storeroom, even the dog's old leash. Nothing. No trace of Nora. No sign of foul play. Just a lonely man with weary eyes who had once been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But suspicion, once planted, doesn't die easily. The headlines the next day screamed, "Neighbor under investigation in missing girl's case." His photograph, awkward, unflattering, appeared on every screen. People didn't see an innocent man. They saw a suspect. Meanwhile, the Adams family was crumbling from the inside. Mrs. Adams had stopped going to church. She had stopped cooking, too. The once vibrant woman who filled her home with light now sat for hours by Nora's bedroom door, clutching the little girl's favorite teddy bear. She spoke less and less, and when she did, it was usually to whisper the same haunting words. "She's still out there, Richard. I can feel her." Her husband, Mr. Adams, had no words left. He filled his silence with bottles. At first, it was just to help him sleep. One drink to numb the ache, to quiet the guilt. But soon, the bottle became his shadow. Every evening, he sat on the front porch with a half-empty glass, staring at the fence, at the kennel next door, and at the small skipping rope that still hung on the clothesline like a ghost of the past. Neighbors avoided the Adams house now. Pity had turned to unease. The whispers had grown crueler. Some said Mr. Adams' drinking was proof of guilt. Others whispered that Mrs. Adams had gone insane. The police stopped coming as often. Cases grew cold, and newer ones took their place. Months passed like heavy pages in a book no one wanted to read. The laughter of neighborhood children returned, but it always faded when they passed the Adams compound. Everyone remembered. Everyone avoided. Then came the last Saturday of June, 6 months after Nora's disappearance. It was time for the monthly neighborhood cleaning exercise, when everyone was expected to tidy their surroundings. The morning sun rose gently over the rooftops as brooms brushed the dusty streets and chatter filled the air again. For the first time in months, the street felt alive. But not for the Adams family. Mrs. Adams stayed indoors. She hadn't stepped outside since the last officer left weeks ago. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes dull. She sat at the window, watching others sweep the street that once echoed with her daughter's laughter. Mr. Adams, on the other hand, decided to join the cleaning. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe, somewhere deep inside, he was looking for something, even if he didn't know what. He picked up a rake and began clearing the front yard. Neighbors murmured greetings, but he barely responded. His movements were slow, deliberate. He worked alone, his face expressionless. Then his eyes drifted, as they always did, to the empty compound next door. The dog kennel still stood there, old, rusted, half sunk into the earth. The house was silent, abandoned. The dog had been removed months ago, but the kennel remained like a scar in the soil. For reasons he couldn't explain, Mr. Adams felt drawn to it that morning. The way the ground sloped beneath it looked odd, uneven, disturbed maybe. He paused his sweeping, staring for a long moment. "Richard," a neighbor called. "You okay?" He blinked, nodding absently. "Yeah," he said, though he wasn't. He found himself walking toward the fence, drawn by something stronger than curiosity, an ache that had never left him. He climbed over, careful not to draw attention, and stepped into the vacant compound. The grass had overgrown, swallowing the path. The air smelled stale, forgotten. When he reached the kennel, he knelt down. The metal bars were rusted, and the ground beneath was patchy. He touched it. The soil was soft, like it had been recently turned once upon a time. A memory flickered in his mind, the sound of that dog barking frantically the night Nora disappeared. Barking at something right there, beneath the kennel. He frowned. No, it couldn't be. He picked up a long stick lying nearby and pushed it into the ground beneath the kennel. To his surprise, it slid in easily. Too easily. The earth gave way like a wound reopening. He froze, heart hammering. Something wasn't right. Something was there. His throat tightened. He wanted to stop, but he couldn't. That pull, that unbearable, desperate instinct, pushed him to dig deeper. And though he didn't yet know it, in a few moments, what he would uncover beneath that kennel would rip open every secret, every lie, every rumor that had haunted the last 6 months, and finally lead him to the truth about his daughter's disappearance. The truth was waiting right there, under the dirt. He turned toward the cleaning group across the street. "Does anyone have a shovel?" he called out, his voice trembling. A man waved one in the air. "Yeah, here." Mr. Adams took it without a word and walked back to the kennel. The metal handle felt heavy in his hands. He stared at the ground for a long second, heart pounding so hard it hurt, then pushed the blade into the soil. The first dig came easy. Too easy. The second unearthed damp, dark earth that smelled faintly of rot. Sweat ran down his temples. His breathing grew uneven. Each thrust of the shovel sent tremors through his body. Part fear, part exhaustion, part the unbearable tension of what he might find. Neighbors began to notice. "Richard," someone called. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. His hands moved faster, driven by something primal. Hope, dread, desperation all tangled into one. And then, his shovel struck something. A dull, muffled sound. He stopped instantly. His breath caught. The silence around him thickened. He knelt down, brushing the soil away with trembling hands. The smell that rose was earthy, but beneath it lingered something faint, something he couldn't quite name but instinctively feared. A piece of fabric emerged. Red, torn, mud-streaked. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. His vision blurred as his fingers closed around it, lifting it gently from the dirt. It was soft and small, a child's dress. Nora's red gown. He remembered it instantly. The gown she'd begged to wear that evening. The one she said made her look like a princess. His hands trembled violently. He brought it closer, staring at the faded floral pattern on the hem, the same pattern his wife had sewn herself. The world began to spin. His throat tightened, his chest burning with grief that refused to stay contained. "No!" His voice broke. "No! God, no!" He dropped to his knees, clutching the muddy gown to his chest, and let out a scream so raw, so piercing, that the entire neighborhood froze. People came running, brooms and rakes forgotten, as the sound of his anguish tore through the quiet morning. Mrs. Adams heard it from inside their house. The moment the scream reached her ears, she knew. She didn't even need to look. Her body collapsed against the wall, her own scream following his, a sound that could only come from a mother who had already buried her hope long ago. Neighbors gathered around the fence as Mr. Adams knelt in the dirt, shaking uncontrollably. The red gown lay spread out before him like a wound. "What is that?" someone whispered. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at the fabric as if it were breathing. The police arrived within minutes, sirens cutting through the once peaceful street. Officer Daniels, the same man who had led the initial investigation, stepped out of the van, disbelief etched on his face when he saw the crowd gathered around the kennel. "Step back, everyone," he ordered, pushing through the group. He stopped when he saw Mr. Adams, still kneeling, still holding the dress. "Where did you find that?" he asked gently. Mr. Adams pointed to the ground, voice barely a whisper. "Here, beneath the kennel." Daniel's jaw tightened. He knelt beside the hole, examining it. "Get the forensics team here now," he barked into his radio. Within the hour, the compound was cordoned off with yellow tape. Investigators moved carefully around the site, photographing the ground, collecting soil samples, bagging the small red gown that had broken open a 6-month-old wound. Mrs. Adams stood behind the fence, silent, watching as the police worked. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy. Tears ran freely down her cheeks, but she didn't seem to notice. She whispered to herself, "She wore that gown that night. I told her to wear something warmer. I told her." Officer Daniels approached Mr. Adams quietly. "We'll need you to come to the station again," he said. "We're reopening the case." Mr. Adams nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the kennel. His voice came out hoarse, broken. "Find whoever did this. Please. I don't care what it takes. Find them." As the police packed their equipment and loaded the evidence into the van, one officer turned to Daniels. "You think the neighbor Brian had something to do with it?" Daniels stared at the empty house, the kennel, the ground that had hidden its secret for half a year. "He moved out 2 months after she vanished," he said quietly. "We're going to find out why." And as the police van drove away, the neighborhood watched in silence. The whispers had stopped, because now everyone knew something terrible had always been buried beneath that kennel, and the truth at last was beginning to claw its way to the surface. The discovery beneath the kennel tore open wounds that never truly healed. Within hours of the red gown being unearthed, the entire neighborhood transformed into a media circus. News vans parked along the quiet lane, their headlights casting long, intrusive beams into the Adams yard. Neighbors who once whispered now stood on the sidewalks, murmuring openly, "They found something. It was buried under Brian's dog kennel. I always knew there was something off about that man." The police worked through the night. Soil samples, photographs, and forensic reports piled up. By dawn, the evidence was clear. The dress had been buried intentionally. Someone had taken the time to dig, hide, and cover. But where was Mr. Brian? He had moved 2 months after Nora disappeared, quietly, without goodbyes, leaving behind the rusted kennel, a near-empty house, and questions that now screamed louder than ever. Detective James Hollis, a grizzled officer with 20 years of cases behind him, was assigned to lead the reopened investigation. His eyes were sharp but tired, his patience worn thin from years of seeing the worst of people. As he reviewed the file in the dimly lit station, the photos of Nora, laughing, skipping rope, wearing that same red gown, seemed to stare back at him like a silent plea. "Find him," he ordered, "wherever he is." By the next afternoon they did. Mr. Brian was living 3 towns away, working at a car repair shop on the edge of a busy highway. When the officers approached him, wrench in hand and oil on his shirt, the look of confusion on his face seemed genuine. "Mr. Brian Cole?" one officer asked. "Yeah. You're under investigation in connection with the disappearance of Nora Adams." His wrench clattered to the ground. The color drained from his face. "What? No. No, that's impossible." But an hour later, he was sitting in an interrogation room under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, his trembling hands clasped together on the metal table. Detective Hollis entered quietly, carrying a folder. He didn't speak at first, just dropped a photo on the table. A picture of the torn, mud-streaked red gown. Brian stared at it, eyes wide. "Where did you—" "It was found under your dog kennel," Hollis said flatly. Silence. Brian's mouth opened, then closed again. His breathing grew shallow. "No. No, that's not." He rubbed his temples, shaking his head. "You think I had something to do with that girl? I didn't. I swear, I didn't even know who buried this there." Hollis leaned forward. "Then explain this. You moved 2 months after she vanished. No one's seen you since. Why leave?" Brian hesitated, his voice breaking. "Because everyone was looking at me like I was a monster. The police searched my house, tore everything apart, treated me like a criminal. I couldn't live there anymore." "Convenient," Hollis said coldly. "You disappear. And now we find evidence buried in your yard." Brian's hands trembled. His voice turned desperate. "You're making a mistake. I didn't touch that girl. I didn't even know she was gone until I saw it on TV." "Then who buried her dress?" Hollis pressed. Brian's eyes darted toward the door, his mind racing. Then slowly he said, "I don't know. But there's someone you should talk to." Hollis narrowed his eyes. "Who?" "Amelia," Brian said quietly. "My ex. She used to live with me for a while, before all this. Things ended badly. She was jealous, angry, said she'd make me regret it. She even threatened to ruin me once." "Ruin you how?" He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I don't know. She'd say things like, 'I'll make everyone see who you really are.' But I never took her seriously." Hollis's gaze didn't waver. "What was her full name?" "Amelia Vaughn."